There we go. Okay, cool. All right. All right, guys. So thank you for letting us kind of crash this. And thank you, Professor Miller, for letting this happen. So Dr. Tiller was originally going to come and visit us, but there were some travel issues. And so instead of him being able to be here in person, we are doing this via Zoom. And so my name is Dr. Matt Schubert. I'm one of the exercise physiology professors in the department. You may see me in 326 in a year or two down the road, depending on, well, everybody has to take 326. But if you also are a movement science major, you might see me in 406 or 426 at some point in the future. And I'm also the coordinator for our graduate program. So those of you that don't know, we do have a master's in kinesiology here. It's a 2-year program, and you get a really good opportunity to do some research, some kind of cutting edge stuff, use some really fun equipment. And as part of that program, a couple of years ago, I had Nick come and talk to our graduate students. It was virtual because it was during the height of the pandemic, but he wrote a book that was published in, I think it was spring 2020. He's going to talk about it a little bit, called The Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science. And it caught my eye because one thing that you will learn as you progress in this field is there's a lot of bad information out there. Specifically on social media. The influencer has become a cancer for the health and fitness industry. And it is going to be your job as kinesiology students and eventually kinesiology professionals to fight that cancer. So it's your job to fight bad information with good information. And one of the things we want you to get out of this program is to learn how to make that evaluation and learn where to find the good information. So Nick's going to talk a little bit about his journey from an exercise physiology student and how he has progressed to somebody who is now doing not only a lot of research, but is also doing a lot of scientific communication and educating people about the misinformation that exists. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to him. I think he's got about a 40-minute talk, and then we'll open it up for questions from you all. And those of you who have joined us online, I'll ask that you keep your microphones muted until we get through his presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions from you as well. So Nick, I will hand the reins over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Schubert, for the kind invitation, for the kind introduction. As Dr. Schubert just said, I was originally supposed to be there in person, and I had to cancel my trip at the last minute thanks to Customs and Border Protection. But I hope to be back in the US sometime in the fall semester. So hopefully I'll get a chance to catch up with some of you then. So I'm certainly going to be talking to you about some of this stuff about critical thinking, scientific skepticism as it relates to health and fitness, the commercial health and fitness industry. And as Matt was just saying, this stuff is absolutely crucial to help people make good decisions in regards to their health and wellness targets. There is so much misinformation and disinformation that is kind of incorrect advice that is deliberately spread, that it's really affecting people's abilities to make good decisions that will improve their health and wellness outcomes. I certainly talk about that a little bit, but it's not the main focus of my talk. What I really want to do is give you an insight as to my career path, because I've learned an awful lot over the past 15 years since I graduated with a degree in sport and exercise science. And although these lessons are specific to me, I am absolutely positive that a lot of those lessons will make really vital takeaways for you all as well. Because when I first started, I pretty much thought that my career would look something like this. That I would be a sport and exercise science student starting at the beginning of the road, and it would be a nice, long, straight, simple road. At the time, I wanted to work in sports performance. So I wanted to work alongside elite athletes, elite coaches, maybe even the Olympics on Olympic performance programs. And I figured that I would get that job, work really hard, get that job, and then I would just, have this long career. But actually, my path has looked something like this. It's not been a straight road. It's been one with lots of twists and unexpected turns. And I fully expect there to be lots more turns in my career in the future. And it's important to kind of reflect on some of those decisions and decide what the main takeaways are. So let me take you right back to the beginning. There are going to be a few very cliche quotes that I'm going to scatter in throughout the talk. So heads up in advance. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And for me, the first step was when I went to high school. Now, this is a place called Chancellor's School. Yes, I am taking you all the way back to my high school education. This is just outside North London in England, obviously in the United Kingdom. If you hadn't guessed by my accent already, yes, I am English. And I don't know what the system, what the structure is in the US, but when I was at school, this was from the ages of 16 to 18, I did something called A-levels. So you would typically pick 3, sometimes 4 subjects that you were particularly interested in or that you were particularly good at. And then you would do coursework, do assignments, take exams, and then you'd get given a grade somewhere between A and F. A is obviously the best, and F would be a fail. And depending on how well you did in your A-levels, it would determine whether or not you went on to further education. Now, for some reason, I found myself studying physics, chemistry, and computer studies. Now, these are 3 subjects that I really was not interested in at all, which is kind of ironic because as an adult, I've become much more interested in physics. For example, I've read lots of books on physics, particularly quantum physics. I still don't really get it, but it doesn't stop me from being interested. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you. I didn't do very well. I got an E, that's a grade E in physics. I got a grade E in computer science, and I failed chemistry with a big fat F. This is something that not even Dr. Schubert knew. So now you know my dirty secret. I failed my A-levels. I may as well not have bothered doing them at all. And I got the lowest grades in my entire year group, bar none. And obviously I was very upset. And I didn't really know what to do with my life because I had aspirations to go to university, and you can't really go to university if you don't have any grades. So I went and spoke to the careers advisor at my old high school. And all high schools and most high schools and all universities have careers advisors, and they generally really know what they're talking about. So I advise you, if you're ever unsure about the sort of the path that you're following, go and speak to your careers advisor. It's a service that is there for you to take advantage of. And I had this long drawn out conversation with her. And I said, basically, I don't know what I want to do. And she said, well, have you ever thought about sports science? Because you're interested in sport, right? And I said, yeah, sport's the only thing I've ever been interested in. I'd done martial arts from the age of about 8, and I had aspirations to run my first marathon. So sport was the only thing that I'd ever had any real interest in. And so she said to me, have you ever thought about doing sports science? And I thought, sports science. And that was my light bulb moment. Because I didn't even know that sports science was a thing. I didn't know you could study that. And the more I thought about it, studying the science of physical activity and sport and exercise, that's something that I could do. That's something that I was interested in. But of course, the problem was I didn't have any A-levels. There was certainly no undergraduate degree courses in the country that would take me on to do a degree in sport and exercise science with these grades. But I knew I had to do something. I wanted to go to university. So I joined this place, the University of Hertfordshire, to do an HND, a higher national diploma in computer science, because I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what else to do. And guess what? I absolutely hated it. I hated it. It was not the subject for me at all, especially when, all you really want to do is sport and study sports science. So I was studying computer science, and about halfway through the first year of my higher national diploma, a friend of mine transferred from his HND in computer science to the undergraduate degree course in geology. I know what you're thinking. Those two things are not even closely related, not even a little bit. But it got me thinking, because I thought, well, it's obviously easier to transfer internally once you're already registered at an institution rather than applying externally. So I thought maybe I could do the same thing for sports science. So I set up a meeting with the admissions tutor for sport and exercise science, a guy called Peter Jones. And he was the admissions tutor. He was also an associate professor. And I said to him, listen, Dr. Jones, all I want to do is sport. All I want to do is sport science. You know, I do sport in my spare time. I learn all about the muscles of the body just because I'm interested, and all the names of the muscles. And if you just give me a chance, I'll prove to you that I can study, and I'll get good grades in sports science, I promise. And he looked at me in the eye and he saw something in me, and he said, no, your grades are crap, not a chance. But he said, but if you finish the first year of your HND in computer science and you prove to me that you can study, that you have the academic ability to get reasonable grades, then, and you pass your exams and you pass them well, I'll give you a place on the undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science. So I left his office feeling absolutely invigorated and inspired, because for the first time in my life, I actually had something to aim for. And I started to study. Even though it was in computer science, I knew that I had to pass the first year my exams. There were 4 exams at the end of the year. And I vowed at that point in time to do whatever I had to do to get the best grades possible. I took 4 exams at the end of the year in this computer science course, and I got 4 A1s. I got the highest grades in my entire year group. Now, there's only one difference between the grades that I got in high school, when I got the lowest grades in my year, and the grades that I got in my HND to get onto sports science, when I got the highest grades in my year. There's only one word. The one difference there is motivation. For the first time in my life, I was actually motivated to study because I was passionate about the subject. So that's kind of the first main takeaway, is that whatever you do, whatever you're going to study, whatever career path you follow, you have to be motivated to do a good job. If you're not passionate about it, you're not motivated, you're not going to do your best work, and then you're wasting everyone's time. So speeding forward then, I spent the next 3 years studying sport and exercise science, had a great time, spent a lot of time in the lab, and I decided to focus on exercise physiology because that was what I was really interested in. I remember having a lecture on the wonderfully complex ways that the body responds to different external stimuli, whether it's exercise or nutrition or hypoxia or space, aviation, deep sea diving. The body responds in all these weird and wonderful ways, and that's what I really wanted to study. So I decided to specialize in exercise physiology. I got really good grades. I think I got the second highest grades in my year group in sport and exercise science, stayed on there for an extra year and a half to do my master's by research. And I left the University of Hertfordshire with an undergraduate degree and a master's in sport and exercise science, exercise physiology. So at this point then, I had to start thinking, well, that's great. You know, things have worked out here. I've got these 2 degrees. Now, what do I want to do with them? And fortunately for me, I was in the pretty enviable position that I knew what I wanted to do. And I'll give you an insight as to that in just a second. Now, I want to do a quick poll at this point with the group. It's not really going to work so well by Zoom, so I just want you to sort of think about it in your own heads. How many of you know at this point what career path you'd like to follow when you finish at university? I mean, I can see the camera, so maybe you can stick your hands in the air. So put your hand up nice and high. How many of you know what career path you'd like to follow when you finish at university? Put your hands up nice and high. I'm not going to pick on you, so don't worry. Just want to see rough numbers. Okay, decent number of you. That's pretty good, actually. All right, you can put your hands down. So actually, that seems like a pretty good proportion of you. And at this stage, I would say that that's almost an anomalous result. So if you know what you want to do, wonderful. Okay, put your hands up once again if you would like to work in elite or high performance sport when you finish university. Put your hands back up. How many of you want to work in elite sport or high performance sport? Okay, far fewer. A couple of you at the back there. Okay, thank you. Hands down. Now, for the record, whenever I've done this kind of poll with my students in the past, 80 to 90% of them put their hands up because they all want to work in high performance and elite sport. And that was exactly what I wanted to do when I was finishing my master's. I wanted to work at the Olympic Games with Olympic athletes and coaches on Olympic performance programs, and I didn't want to do anything else. But here's a little consciousness raiser for you. I want you to have a guess how many kinesiology degrees are awarded every year in the US alone. Okay, just have a think, come up with a number. I'll give you a clue. It's more than 5,000. So just come up with a number in your head. How many kinesiology degrees are awarded every single year in the USA? And this one just happened to be counted from 2020. Well, the answer is in 2020, it was 31,165 kinesiology degrees. That is an awful lot. What that means is there's an awful lot of competition. So whatever job you want to do, whether that's in high performance sport or you want to work with athletes at any other level, amateur athletes, maybe you want to work in a clinic, maybe you want to go and specialize in exercise psychology, or you want to go into personal training or become a nutritionist. There are a lot of people in your position that want to do the same thing. So the competition for jobs is going to be very, very difficult. What that means is you have to work like this person in the background here to distinguish yourself among all of your peers. And when I finished my master's, taking you back to my career journey, that's exactly what I started to do. So I started to attend workshops and courses and lectures to upskill myself on various aspects of high performance sport. I started to volunteer my time working in a lab with various athletes and people preparing for different sports and sports competitions. I started to do my accreditation with BASES. That's the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences. That's the governing body for sports science in the UK. And most crucially, I started to volunteer my time to get experience. So I was living in North London at the time, and there was an excellent Olympic level lab on the southwest of London. And I would travel every weekend across London. It took me about 2.5 hours to drive there each way. And I would go and volunteer my time to get as much experience as I possibly could, because you need the education, you need the experience, and you need the skills as well. And to cut a long story short, when a position finally came up in Olympic sport, I was ready to apply for it. And I was very fortunate to get a job at the English Institute of Sport in the United Kingdom. This is the service provider of choice to the Olympic performance programs. And I spent a couple of years working here at Bisham Abbey High Performance Center. These jobs are very hard to come by. The reason that I was able to get one was because I was dedicated, borderline obsessive about achieving this goal. I knew where I was, I knew where I had to be, and I was very systematic and methodical about, okay, what do I need to do to achieve this goal on the other side of this this hurdle, if you like. So I'm going to play you a very quick clip from one of my favorite movies. This is National Treasure, starring Nicolas Cage. I don't know how many of you have seen it. There's a very short quote. Hopefully the sound will work. You might have to listen carefully.
You don't need someone crazy, but one step short of crazy. What do you get? Obsessed. Passionate.
So did you hear the sound okay? Yeah, got a few nods. Okay, good. So what do you get if you're one step short of crazy? And Riley says obsessed. You might recognize him from The Hangover. And Nicolas Cage's character says, I think passionate. I think probably if you really want to achieve something, you have to be a little bit obsessed about it. And to be, if I'm being diplomatic, I would say you have to be dedicated. But without dedication, you're not going to achieve any of these things. So that's the second big takeaway, is to figure out what you want to do, be very dedicated in order to achieve it. So I had a couple of years working on Olympic performance programs. I worked with GB rowing athletes in the lead up to the Beijing Games. I did some work with synchronized swimming. I spent a year working with the GB Flatwater Kayak Squad. This is a picture of a very young Mo Farah training at St. Mary's University, Twickenham, before he really hit it big. and I had a great time working at the English Institute of Sport. But after a couple of years there, again, this is where the path continues to twist and turn, I became a little bit disillusioned because I realized that in talking to the elite athletes, the athletes were very, very dedicated to the role, as you'd expect. But everything that you do in high performance sport has to be funneled through the coach. It doesn't matter if you have these wonderful ideas and if you have a great rapport with the athlete. If you don't have a great rapport with the coach, you're not going to get very far. And I was working with a lot of coaches, some of whom were Hungarian, some of whom were German. They didn't really understand the British sports science system very well. And I would regularly have meetings that would end up like this. Coach would say to me, look, screw the science, doesn't make the boat move faster. Or they'd say, I don't really believe in sports science, particularly the Hungarian coaches, because they don't have sports science where they come from. They have a very different system. And this is an actual quote from one of the coaches. I wanted to implement a certain strategy, a certain intervention with the athletes. Coach didn't want to do it. And he literally said to me, well, I've won 5 Olympic gold medals. How many of you won? And when you're dealing with that kind of mentality, you don't really have much to come back on. Because it's true, I haven't won any Olympic gold medals, particularly as a young and relatively inexperienced physiologist. You can't really come back with a statement like that. So I realized at that point that I was in love with the science, but I wasn't so much in love with the sport. So I decided to leave the English Institute of Sport and go and do my PhD at Brunel University, London. This is in West London. I was focusing on human respiratory physiology in healthy humans. I won't go into detail on that very much, but I spent 3 years at Brunel University. I was looking at respiratory mechanics. This is me sticking a balloon catheter up somebody's nose. It goes in pernasally, and then they swallow it down into the esophagus. So the catheter actually sits in the esophagus, and we can measure pressure changes in the airway. This is me sticking another catheter in somebody. Here we're doing some bilateral phrenic nerve stimulation. So we actually stimulate the nerves in the neck to innervate the diaphragm so we can activate the respiratory muscles. This is me presenting at the Sports Science Conference. Here I am captaining the Brunel MMA club. So I had a great time at university doing sport and doing science, everything that we know and love. And it was around this time, even though I had a stipend, I was a relatively broke student. So I started to do a little bit of writing for some mainstream media outlets. And I published a couple of articles. This one was in an outlet called Peak Performance Magazine. This was also Peak Performance. This was in Cycling Weekly. And I started to write about something that I was very interested in. It was sort of how to separate the fact from the fiction in terms of sport and exercise science or health and fitness, because I was starting to realize that there's this huge disparity, this huge gap between the health and wellness industry and the scientific evidence that is supporting the claims in the health and wellness industry. And there's a lot of misinformation and pseudoscience around exercise and training and nutrition and so forth. So I started to write about it. I didn't have a lot of time to explore this in a lot of detail, but I started to accumulate more and more notes. And I remember thinking to myself, there's enough here to make a book. I'm sure there's, I could write a book on this someday. Of course, I was doing my PhD at the time, so I didn't have any bandwidth just to write a book, but we'll come back to this later on. But needless to say, the seed had been planted. So I finished at Brunel University in around 2014 with my PhD in human respiratory physiology. And after a couple of minor appointments, I started here at Sheffield Hallam University, which is where I first met Dr. Schubert. And I was an assistant and associate professor in applied physiology. I taught a couple of classes on exercise physiology, applied sports nutrition. I was director of the sports science labs. I was deputy chair of the ethics committee. But the main work that I was doing when I was at Hallam was I was able to indulge my love and interest in ultra endurance exercise. Now, by this time, I'd been running ultra marathons for about a decade, and I'd done some of the world's toughest endurance races. This is me running the Marathon des Sables through the Sahara Desert. This is the Ray Miller 50 in Southern California. I did Ironman. I did races in the mountains and hills in the UK. Yes, we do have mountains in the UK. And so I had this very personal interest, this personal passion for ultra endurance sport. And I decided that I wanted to start looking at the physiology and the pathophysiology of ultra endurance exercise. I wanted to combine my personal and my professional interests into one. So I started to set up lots of research studies looking at ultra endurance physiology. This is a picture that I took in Chamonix in the French Alps. This is a study when we were looking at the respiratory responses to people who were running 10 marathons over 10 days. So I camped in a field and was collecting data at the start-finish line. This is when I rescued a pig that had escaped from a local farm on the same event. This is a lab that we set up on the side of a mountain. This is me doing some lung function testing in the front of a bus because there was nowhere else to do it. So hashtag science on a bus. So I had a great time exploring all of these kind of different research projects. And I'm pleased to say that over the years, we've published most of this work in some pretty decent outlets, and I've made a substantial contribution to our understanding of ultra endurance physiology. And that's something that I continue to do. However, despite really enjoying my work and enjoying engaging with the students as an associate professor and my research, I felt a little bit rudderless. And as the quote goes, a rudderless ship and a purposeless person are eventually stranded on desert sand. And this was kind of me looking a little bit lost out the window, because even though I enjoyed my work, I didn't really have a mentor in physiology. I wasn't really learning and expanding and developing as an exercise scientist, as a researcher. And if I'm honest with you, I was a little bit bored of the United Kingdom. I'd been there all my life. I felt like I'd seen everything that it had to offer. I'd seen all the places. I was bored of the weather. I'd had enough of it, and I needed a change, and I needed a new opportunity. And it just so happened that at the time I saw a job advert that came up online, and it was based in Southern California, specifically Los Angeles, at the Lungus Institute at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. And this chap, Harry Rossiter, was advertising for a postdoc in respiratory medicine, exercise physiology, respiratory medicine. And if you're interested in exercise physiology at all, it's difficult to read any research without Harry Rossiter having something to do with it. So he's a really big name in this area. So again, to cut another story a little bit shorter, I applied for that role. It took a long time to go through the application process because things seem to work a little bit slower in the States, but I was fortunate enough to get offered the position, and I left the United Kingdom and set up shop in Southern California. And that's where I'm currently employed. And the only reason that I find myself in the position that I am now is because I had the flexibility to embrace new opportunities as they came along. I wasn't so kind of stuck in my ways that I was going to dismiss or ignore opportunities. And when opportunity knocks, you've got to make sure that you open the door. So I guess that's the third takeaway, is be open-minded. Don't assume that you're going to find that one career role that suits you for the rest of your life. If you enjoy your work, then great, but be flexible enough and open-minded enough to take on new opportunities when they come along. So I'm currently employed at Harbor UCLA Medical Center as a senior researcher, and I lived for 3 years in Hermosa Beach. I have now set up a hybrid working model. So I'm based in Montreal, and I go back and forth between Montreal and Los Angeles every few months. And so far it seems to be working. And the one thing, other than, I'm not going to tell you about my research at Harbor UCLA, but the other thing that you're perhaps more interested in is, since I've been at Harbor, I've sort of reconnected with this work that I started during my PhD. So investigating science and pseudoscience in health and wellness. And I had 8 years of notes that I'd been accumulating and compiling. And I finally found the bandwidth to write a book that was eventually published in spring of 2020 by Routledge, Taylor and Francis. As you know, now it's called The Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science. I'm honored to have received a couple of awards for it, and it seems to get pretty good reviews, so it's been well received. Let me just spend a couple of minutes telling you about some of the themes of the book, because this health and wellness industry that we all either work in, or there's a good chance that you're going to work in it in some capacity when you leave university, it's got a market value of $4.4 trillion. So this is more than the smartphone industry, the fast food industry, and social media platforms all put together, right? So this is big business. And sales derive from, fad diets, exercise training programs, health club memberships, sports equipment, supplements, complementary and alternative medicine, things like acupuncture, for example. And let me just give you a few examples of some of the more prominent fallacious claims in health and wellness. So some of you might be familiar with the Luminosity app. They claimed that their brain training application could prevent Alzheimer's and help students perform at school. And the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, deemed that they had engaged in deceptive advertising and charged Luminosity $2 million. An example you might be more familiar with. This is vitamin water from Coca-Cola. They said that their product could promote healthy joints and reduce the risk of eye disease. So these are fairly profound claims, right? They didn't have any evidence to support the claims. So they were sued for fraudulent vitamin water claims. This one from New Balance, they said that their toning sneakers could increase calorie expenditure and help to tone muscles. Again, there was no evidence to support the claims. So a false advertising lawsuit was filed, and again, they were fined. Here's an example of green coffee bean extract that was featured on the Dr. Oz show as a, quote, magic weight loss product. And again, the Federal Trade Commission were on point here to charge the manufacturers with deceiving consumers through, quote, fake news sites and bogus weight loss claims. So these things didn't do what it was claimed. And the last example, some of you might be too young to remember this. I'm sure some of your professors will remember these. These are power balance bracelets, and they are embedded with holograms that harmonize with your body's natural frequencies to improve strength and wellness and vitality and libido and all of these, concentration, all of these things. And I think it was around 2010, the Australian Consumer Commission, the ACCC, deemed that Power Balance had engaged in misleading advertising, forced them to pay back all of their profits, and they eventually went out of business. So that story has a happy ending. But these are just a few examples of manufacturers who have actually been held to account for their misleading claims. Most of them are not. Only one study has looked at this empirically. So this is a study that was published in the British Medical Journal in 2012 by Hennigan and colleagues. And they looked at over 100 different sport and exercise products and over 400 different sports performance claims around those products. And what they found was that 53% of the time, those claims were completely unsupported by any kind of scientific evidence, right? And when evidence was provided, it was found to be at a high risk of bias in 85% of cases. So they concluded that there is a, quote, striking lack of evidence to support the vast majority of sports-related products. Now, we can go into lots of detail and talk all day about this, about why this has come about and why this is such a problem. We don't really have time to do that now. That's another lecture altogether. Maybe when I come back in the fall, I can talk to you guys about it in more detail. But just understand that this has really profound negative implications. Number one, for sports performance, because it stands to reason that if you want an athlete to perform, you want them to invest their limited time and resources in evidence-based practices that we know actually have an effect, right, on exercise performance. But it can also affect clinical practice, because it's all very well athletes using placebo products or products that are not evidence-based, but it's absolutely impossible to restrict these placebo products purely to sports performance. Sooner or later, somebody's going to use one of these placebo products to treat some kind of clinical disorder. And there are lots of examples in the media and in the scientific literature of exactly that happening. So as an example, maybe you'll remember from the Rio Olympic Games, Michael Phelps came out and performed with these big circular bruises all over his back and shoulders that resulted from the ancient Chinese therapy of cupping. Well, Phelps uses cupping to help reduce muscle soreness, but the British Cupping Association say that cupping can be effective in helping to treat asthmatic symptoms. And this is a non-evidence-based practice. So we're getting on thin ice there. It can affect population health because, for example, fad diets have been shown in the literature to be ineffective at helping people to achieve long-term weight management. Fad diets don't work. The literature is very clear on that. So people bounce from one fad diet to the next. They don't ever achieve their healthy weight loss goals. And this is why profits from the diet industry are at an all-time high, and obesity rates are also at an all-time high. So work that one out. But it's also damaging the reputation of our discipline. There is a huge perceived overlap between health and wellness on the one hand and sports science on the other. And if one of them deals in pseudoscience and false claims the whole time, that comes back on us as professionals, as sports scientists, or as budding sports scientists. That can make it very difficult for us to do our jobs as well. This has been an area of my research over the last couple of years, and I've published a couple of key papers. I encourage you to go and look up. These are available online, particularly this one, baseless claims and pseudoscience in health and wellness. This is a call to action. So it's a pretty quick read, so I encourage you to go and look that up. That's on sports medicine. At the end of last year, I was asked to go and do a keynote talk at the CSICon, at CSICon, which is the conference for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. This was in Las Vegas in October last year. And that was sort of bringing health and wellness science and pseudoscience to a larger audience. I've written, this is my website, I've written dozens of articles on science and pseudoscience in health and wellness. As I've said, I've devoted some of my research time to this. I've been on lots of different podcasts, a few radio and TV spots, and lots of video presentations as well. And I'm just going to share one of those TV spots with you now. This is just, I think this is about 4 minutes long. This is last year when I was on Chicago Morning News. And it was wonderful that this platform were actually, or that this news outlet were giving a platform to discuss these important issues. So this is just a great opportunity to kind of speak to a larger audience. So I'm going to play this short clip for you now, and it just kind of talks about some of the things that I've been mentioning the last few minutes. Again, hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Okay. If I can play it. Oh no. That's not playing. Okay, let's see if I come out of presenter view. Bear with me, technical hitch.
Spend $90 billion a year on health club memberships and $100 billion a year on dietary supplements. But in an industry filled with lax regulations and false advertising, do we really know how well these things work? And why do so many of us fall for the quick fix? In the Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science, Nick Tiller confronts the claims behind the products and the evidence behind the claims. Nick Tiller joins us live. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, great to be here.
I think people feel like the government or somebody is watching out for false advertising or products that really don't work. What's the reality?
Well, the reality is, and you've sort of touched on it already, there are very, very lax regulations surrounding the products we're sold. The commercial health and fitness industry operates very, very differently to the world of the clinical world of pharmaceuticals, where there's a minimum threshold of evidence that has to be surpassed. In the commercial world of health and fitness, very, very lax regulations means that manufacturers can say and do whatever they like. They can make whatever claims they want, and they're not really held accountable to them. So the disparity between the claims and the evidence is sometimes pretty huge.
Well, let's get to some examples. This idea of something being all natural or natural products is kind of this catch-all, and people feel good about that. But let's use whey protein as an example.
Yeah, sure. So I won't spend too much time talking about whey protein specifically, but the claims with whey protein, and as you said, when it's claimed that they contain all natural ingredients, and the other one that we see quite often is free from chemicals. This is marketing rhetoric that's designed to exploit a bias, an ingrained bias that everyone has, called the appeal to nature. And this is a bias that basically has people thinking that something that is naturally derived is somehow better or morally superior than something that is not naturally derived. So we have lots of products now that are marketed as being free from chemicals. The reality is, if it were free from chemicals, it wouldn't exist, because chemicals make up everything. But the phrasing is designed to cut to the core of this bias that we have in order to sell product, and it's very effective.
What is L-carnitine? I haven't heard of that, but it's been marketed for weight loss.
So L-carnitine is a fat loss supplement that's been around for many, many decades, and it's just L-carnitine alone has been the basis for weight loss shakes, weight loss bars, different diets, and so forth. And the reality is that many decades of research have failed to show any intriguing evidence that L-carnitine does anything to help people improve their ability to burn fat. But again, in the commercial health and fitness industry, the science is subordinate to the marketing. Marketing is king. So by using the right rhetoric, you can sell anything.
And in marketing, this use of before and after images for weight loss, that seems like something simple that you have proof of, but you say a lot of those are just fake?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. Quite often people are going through these dramatic transformations, but usually they're not in 6 or 8 weeks, as is often claimed. Often the images have been touched up with Photoshop and other editing software, and often what is not shown is the after image. So somebody goes on a fad weight loss diet and they lose a lot of weight very quickly, but the studies show that in 1 or 2 year follow-ups, people regain all of the weight that they lose. So actually, if you showed an image 6 months, 1 year after the after image, then you'd show them that they've put on most of the weight that they've lost. So the before and after images, again, it's an emotive argument. It cuts to the core of one of these biases that we have.
I'm going to jump ahead to 2 examples of celebrity endorsement. I remember Derrick Rose was advertising those like magnetic bracelets, and it was Michael Phelps and the cupping, which you see is popular at spas. I'm sure he was a good swimmer and Derrick was a good basketball player before they did these things. Do these things have any basis in science, reality? Do they really work?
No, they don't. And cupping specifically has been studied extensively. It's broadly considered to be an alternative medicine. It's a pseudoscience, and it works only in the context of placebo. And what I mean by that is people have the expectation that it will work, and they perceive that it has positive effects, but that's very different to having actual physical effects on the body. And, I, like all good scientists, have to point my nose in the direction of the scientific research. And the scientific research, because it's controlled and it's objective, shows that cupping really doesn't have any direct physical effects on the body, and it really is indistinguishable from placebo. The magic bracelets have been around for a long time, and I don't know if it's possible to be more ridiculous than cupping, but possibly those magic bracelets, they might take the award home.
All right. Well, for more, you can check out nbtiller.com or follow Nick on social media. There you go. There's the info on your screen. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. My pleasure. All right. So as I said, it's just great that that these news outlets are offering platforms to discuss these really important issues because they affect not just things in health and wellness, but they affect all facets of society, the ability to think critically. So as I start to wrap things up, then I find myself doing more sort of writing. And so I started as a sports scientist, and now I find myself, I'm still a researcher, I'm still an exercise scientist, but I do a lot more in science communication than ever before. I write a monthly column for the Skeptical Inquirer, which is the magazine for science and reason. It's an honor to write for them because they've got a wonderful storied history. I write a column for Ultra Running Magazine as well. So it sort of brings together my interest in ultra endurance exercise and science. In addition to The Skeptic's Guide, I've written my first novel, which, yes, believe it or not, because I wanted to do it. And I get the other bit of unofficial advice. If you want to do something, don't overthink it. Just get on with it and do it. Be a doer, not a thinker. No, I always wanted to write a novel, so I just got on and did it. That's hopefully going to be published before the end of the year, but it might bleed into the early next year. And then I've got 3 other books in the pipeline. One of which is going to be not exactly a follow-up to The Skeptic's Guide, but it's going to be along the same kind of theme that will be published probably again end of this year, early next year, and that will be published by Columbia Press. But more about that in due course. So just to finish then, as I started off as a sports scientist, and I thought that I would just be a sports scientist throughout my career, but actually the first twist came when I became a performance physiologist, and then I became an academic and then a researcher. And now I think of myself more as an author and a writer. And so you've got to be open-minded and think, okay, well, let's just see where the road leads. Let's finish with another corny quote, because we started with one. Nobody really knows who said this. Some people say Oscar Wilde, some people say Confucius, but it doesn't really matter. Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Yes, it's super corny, but I think that's wonderful advice, because I really love what I do. I genuinely enjoy writing. I enjoy the researching. If I won the lottery tomorrow, if I won the state federal lottery, was it $2 billion or something, $2 billion? If I won all that money, I'd continue doing what I'm doing. I maybe wouldn't work so many weekends, but I keep doing what I'm doing because I enjoy it. So be motivated, find your passion and you'll find your motivation. Without that, you're not going to do anything worthwhile. Be dedicated to whatever it is you want to do. Once you figure out what that is, be borderline obsessive and work. You've got to work to achieve your goals, and be open-minded and flexible so that you don't ignore or dismiss opportunities when they come knocking. You can find out more about me and the work that I do on my website, nbtiller.com. Reach out to me on Twitter. And it's now around 45 minutes into the session. So I'm going to open it up to some questions, and hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion. So thank you for your time. Thanks for your attention. I hope you found it useful.
Comments? Observations? Things you want to know?
Yeah, question, go for it.
What's the book called again? The one that you wrote about skeptic science?
Yeah, so the book is called The Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science, and the subtitle is Confronting Myths of the Health and Fitness Industry. So it's a bit of a mouthful on the title, but you can find it online. It's on Amazon and this kind of thing. I'm not here to plug my book, but I honestly, I wrote the book because it's an area that is neglected, and really I was amazed to find that nobody's really written about the intersection of critical thinking and health and fitness, which is just amazing given how much BS there is out there. 99% of the products that we're sold in health and wellness don't do anything, or at least they don't do what is claimed. So the book is kind of all about covering that broad area. So it's called The Skeptic's Guide to Sports Science. You can find out more on my website, nbtiller.com. Any questions about anything in general? It doesn't have to be about my book. It could be about the research. It could be about your career aspirations. If not, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a myth you fell for.
A myth you fell for.
Oh, any that I've fallen for?
Yeah.
Was that the question?
Yeah.
It's a myth you fall for.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, if maybe Matt, I think you're closer to the mic, so you can just repeat the questions. But yeah, okay, I got that. So I tried acupuncture back in the day. Believe it or not, acupuncture has been studied really extensively. I mean, I've fallen for lots of these. Before I was a critical thinker, before I was a sports scientist, I tried lots of supplements. I went to had acupuncture at a physio because I was having all sorts of calf problems. It's when I first got into running. And if you look at the literature, you know, there's a huge body of research on acupuncture, and really the good studies show that it doesn't really have any effects that are distinguishable from placebo. It doesn't really work, despite the fact that it's everywhere and everyone uses it. But I had acupuncture, didn't work for me. In the cases where it has worked, I think people are probably, it's working via placebo. People are convincing themselves that it works. But I tried that. I've tried lots of supplements over the years. And of course, some supplements do work. There's evidence to support the use of some supplements in the minority. What else have I tried? Nothing really too gratuitous. I think probably acupuncture is the main one. Anyone else? Yeah, I think there's an arm up at the back.
What supplements would you actually support?
Okay, good question. So this is it's actually a fairly easy one to answer, because if you look at some of the position stands that have been written by the sports nutrition experts, they're pretty transparent about which products have a good body of evidence and which ones don't. So, for example, the International Society of Sports Nutrition, the ISSN, a couple of years ago, published a big position stand. There must have been like 20 authors on the thing. And we know that creatine seems to work. There's a really good body of literature on creatine since about the early 1990s. Obviously, it depends what context you're using it in, but in terms of short-term recovery from high-intensity exercise, you know, like weight training, sprinting, that kind of thing, it seems to have a beneficial effect on the rate of recovery. Protein, I mean, I don't really necessarily think of the protein as a supplement. There's nothing magic about protein supplements. We know that meeting your protein requirements is important for athletic recovery. So if you're not meeting your protein requirements, then taking in a protein supplement has been shown to be effective in facilitating recovery. But if you plan it ahead, you can do that without taking a supplement. You know, you can do that through your diet, but not everyone is organized enough to do that. We know that during endurance sport, like triathlons and marathons, taking in glucose or some kind of simple carbohydrate seems to be very effective. It delays the onset of fatigue by sparing muscle glycogen. I'm sure this is not new to any of you. Again, the body of literature on this is pretty considerable. And some of the other supplements may be on the periphery that have a good body of evidence, but not overwhelming, are things like beta-alanine and maybe even nitric oxide. But I mean, other than that, maybe leucine as well as a key amino acid. There's evidence now emerging that actually it's not really just protein, but it's the leucine content of the protein that seems to be very important. But by and large, you know, there are something like 20, at the last count, 25,000 different supplements that were on sale around the world, and a tiny minority of them actually have any beneficial effect on the body. And even then, it's a pretty small effect. Studies estimate between 1% and 3% performance improvement, and you can get a much bigger improvement by focusing on your diet and your sleep and your recovery and, you know, your training program and all these kinds of things. So it's interesting though, because people like to turn to supplements. They like to buy gadgets and new shoes and garments and Fitbits and all these kinds of things because of a bias called the quick fix fallacy. It's this idea that we all have this inherent desire to have simple solutions to complex problems. And this is why when people want to lose weight, they take a supplement. When people want to get in shape, they try, you know, some key exercise that they think is going to expedite them to their fitness goals. I used to work, when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I used to work in a running store. Somebody came in with an injury, and instead of thinking about, well, how can I change my training or you know, how can I improve my recovery, they wanted to buy some compression ties to fix their injury. And all that's going to do is treat the symptoms. It's not going to treat the root cause of the problem. So people are conditioned to seek out simple solutions to complex problems. So as professionals, we need to try and discourage people from doing that as much as possible. So hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, I went off on a rant a little bit there.
Yeah, and in my physiology class, Nick, I talk about what are called the big five supplements. I think 2019, Pete Keeling did a review in the International Journal of Sport Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism, which you're associate editor of. But the ones he listed are caffeine, creatine, sodium bicarbonate, beta alanine, and nitrate or beetroot.
Yeah, exactly. And these, you know, there's a pretty good body of literature. It's not perfect. And the other thing to consider is that there was a big analysis done. I write about this in my work on skepticism, but there was a big analysis done looking at the positive effects in the literature when the study has been funded by industry. And those studies are much more likely to find significant effects of whatever it is they're looking at than studies that are not funded by the industry. So that, you know, shows that there is some kind of inherent bias for studies that are externally funded. So that's a bit of a problem. But as good critical thinkers, as good skeptics, these are things that we have to consider. But yeah, by and large, those are the supplements that seem to have a pretty good body of evidence behind them.
Well, not to hijack the conversation, but the other thing to consider there is that it's difficult to get funding to do this kind of research. And so, you know, it's almost like a double-edged sword. You know, do you take the industry money to do the research, or do you struggle to find other ways to do it?
Yeah, and I think that's an important lesson, you know, for everyone here, is that when you go into this area, it doesn't matter if you go into work in nutrition or physiology, strength and conditioning, psychology, whatever, at some point you're going to have to probably try and balance your professional interests, your personal interests, and your intellectual integrity, right? Because on the one hand, if a big company comes along and offers you $200,000 to go and do some research on a new product that they've developed, well, you'd be a fool to turn that down. But on the other hand, you have to make sure that you can be objective enough and preserve your integrity to make sure that whatever the results are, that you publish them anyway, and that you can conduct the study as objectively as you possibly can. Because the worst thing that could happen is for your data, for your research to be brought into question because you've engaged in some kind of questionable research practice. And unfortunately, it's more common than you might think. So it is possible to do these things and to do funded research, but you have to do it as an independent, never do it as a consultant working for one of these companies, because that's what we call a red flag. You know, you've always got to, whenever you look at a study on some kind of supplement, always read the thing and then skip to the end and look at the acknowledgements and see who funded the study. Doesn't mean that the results are necessarily going to be brought into question, but I'd want to know if a study showed some amazing benefit of using a supplement, I'd want to know who funded that study. Yeah, so these are important things to look out for.
Do we have any questions from those online? Any more questions from you all in here?
Well, before I go, as I said, you know, if you're on social media, reach out. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. Check out my website, and hopefully I'll get to see you all in person when I come back, probably in the fall, around that sort of time.
And both your Instagram and your Twitter handles are the same, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Twitter is at NBTiller. My Instagram is nb.tiller, but you'll find me. And I tweet about it. They're both kind of professional accounts, pretty much. I tweet about exercise physiology, critical thinking, skepticism, and all the work that I do is put on there as well. So if you're on social media, be sure to reach out.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Nick. We greatly appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good one. Take care.